Welcome. Come in. Close the door behind you. Make yourself comfortable. And let me ask you a simple question. Have you ever felt like you were acting out a life you never rehearsed? Like you were repeating phrases without knowing who said them first? Like sometimes you laughed, not because your soul wanted to, but because the moment demanded it. There's something strange that few dare to name. We're all connected by a mind we don't think, but that thinks us. A kind of invisible cloud where the ideas we never question live, where the fears we never chose are stored, where decisions we think are ours were planted long before we were born. And there we are, grown-ups carrying our grandparents' traumas, applauding goals that don't move us, lining up for lives that don't belong to us. And the wildest part? Believing we're original, when in reality we're just echoes with names. But take it easy. This isn't an accusation, it's an invitation, not to escape the system, but to play it better. Not to fight the world, but to laugh with it until you've memorized the whole thing. Because if you're going to be here, on this planet full of contradictions, memes, bills, notifications, awkward silences, and songs that wreck you from the inside out, at least do it with style. And if you're going to listen to something now, let it be something that's not trying to teach you anything, but somehow helps you remember everything. There are no perfect characters, no recycled morals, no enlightened sages with a Google voice, just real stories, moments that feel like comedy but hide philosophy, mistakes that smell like truth, and words that aren't here to convince you. They're here so someone somewhere can sigh and say, "That happened to me too." You didn't come to this audiobook by chance. I promise, this wasn't algorithmic. You're here because something in you still remembers what it feels like to be free, while still playing this game. You came to laugh at who you were. You came to love who you are. And surely to choose with more awareness who you're becoming. Now then, settle in, breathe, and don't try to understand everything, because this isn't meant to be understood. It's meant to be lived. Chapter 1. The game that thinks for the player. There is a game we all play without realizing it. We play it when we're born, when we speak, when we choose, when we get dressed, when we applaud, when we get angry, when we post, when we sleep, and even when we die. It's a game with no clear rules, yet everyone repeats them. A game with no announcement, yet everyone signs up. And if you don't play, they point at you, they fear you, or they forget you. It's the game of the collective mind, the greatest stage ever built, a spectacle where everyone performs and no one directs, or rather, where everyone thinks they're in charge, unaware that the script was written centuries ago. The problem isn't that the game exists. The problem is that no one told you you were in it. We all play this game without knowing it. We play it at birth, in speech, in our choices, in the way we dress, the way we smile for photos even when we don't feel like it. It's the game of the collective mind, the grand theater where everyone acts and no one remembers the script was set long ago, written perhaps by God himself, so we might all have the chance to play at being gods, at being creators. And the most beautiful part of this creation, this chance, this game we call life, is that it never really ends. There's always one more level, one more question yet to be asked, one more feeling waiting to be felt, one more love still unnamed. I don't say this as a preacher. You don't need to be enlightened or a prophet or a scholar to see clearly the path we're choosing as a species. You just have to look, honestly. You just have to notice how fast we're moving and where that speed is taking us. The same human ingenuity that once let us open a fridge and find fresh food is now designing devices to live beneath our skin. What once clothed us now begins to expose us, exposes our bets, our debts, our excess, exposes the emotional algorithm that measures our feelings with digital hearts and predictable reactions. Because the collective mind is not a voice of your own. It's the voice of many. It's an echo, not a person, but a chorus, not a conspiracy, but a continuation. It's that invisible current that carries your thoughts like dry leaves. You don't see it, but it answers you. You don't choose it, but it lives in you. It's the manual you never read, but follow anyway. The collective mind is why you dress that way, why you smile in selfies you didn't want to take, why you repeat phrases you've never questioned. It's not evil, just ancient. It's the sum of all the ideas, fears, truths, superstitions, habits, and rules humanity has accumulated like souvenirs from previous generations. It lives in proverbs, in the news, in memes, in grandparents, in algorithms. It's the great cloud of inherited thoughts. But it also proves that we're connected, that no one thinks alone, that we're all playing the same game, unknowingly. And if one day you're able to look at it without fear, without fighting it, without surrendering, you'll be able to use it as a mirror, not as a prison. Because the collective mind isn't hacked with anger. It's hacked with laughter, with art, with presence, with the courage to think differently without needing to convince anyone, with the tenderness of knowing we're all trying to remember who we are, even if we do it by repeating what we don't understand. This vast mind that moves more than 8 billion beings of light has chosen its icons, calls them leaders, visionaries, productivity celebrities, applauds their goals, their quotes, their launches, but very few pay attention to the real direction of the map. Because the moment humanity allows the organic body to become a direct extension of a chip, everything will change. I'm not just talking about productivity, identity, or privacy. I'm talking about our humanity, the kind that vibrates when hearing a Lennon song, or when Nat King Cole floats across a cloud of sound, the kind that's moved by a rainbow's colors or by a smile that still dares to say, "What a beautiful world." Lennon found that world in Yoko Ono's eyes, not in commercial deals, not in award shows, not in sold-out tours or endless excess. In her art, in her gaze. The same Yoko who was blamed by the collective mind for breaking up not just a band, the greatest band, but an era. Because it's easier to assign blame than to ask how many times John begged her not to leave him alone in all that noise. Because that's what love does. When it's real, it doesn't need justifications, only presence. And maybe all Yoko did was go enjoy the show, to be with him, to not leave him alone in the madness. That's what still pulses in this species that dares to breathe. Love, art, awareness. And if one day humanity listens to itself, really listens, it might just dissolve its shadows. But beware, if we remove every flaw, every pause, every contradiction, what remains won't be human anymore. It'll be over-edited, prefabricated, odorless, riskless, soulless. And art was not made for that. Art is the garment that beautifully dresses the organic body. It doesn't hide it, it celebrates it. A body that makes mistakes, that feels, that laughs, that bleeds, that needs rest, food, breath, courage. Because if it loses those things, it's no longer a body. It's marble, it's a mold, it's an algorithm. And no, we wouldn't see Robin Williams dressed as a mother in a web of love and laughter in a timeless comedy. We wouldn't be making that film with him. We wouldn't remember the light left behind by those who gifted us with their human touch in our films, in our music, in our days. Humanity is winning, but be careful with victories that cost the soul, because even when effort is real, if everything feels automated, we lose the wonder. The collective mind has shown this. When someone dominates the game too perfectly, the thrill disappears. We saw it with Schumacher. At first, a hero, a leader, an inspiration. He won race after race, until his dominance became routine. Who won? They'd ask at the bar. Schumacher, someone would say, and everyone would nod, like they already knew the ending before the movie started. That's what happens when everything is measured, repeated, perfected. Love, art, beauty. They don't live in mechanical repetition. They live in the crack, in the flaw, in the unexpected. They happen when there's skin, not just data, when there's vulnerability, not just perfection. Art is the door to the soul. And because of that, it's also the door to critique, to lucidity, to poetry. I say this as a fan of salsa, the good kind, the kind that rose in the 70s, 80s, 90s, the kind that shouted truths while making crowds dance. Today, we honor timeless songs and immortal figures, Cantinflas, Einstein, the unforgettable Hector Lavoe. Because yes, real art transcends genres, languages, centuries. But also, without realizing it, we repeat lyrics without digesting them. We chant them without reflection. We applaud lines born of pain, without looking at the pain that wrote them. And something deep in us begins to reject those phrases that sound pretty but don't move us. "Soon my luck will change," sang a voice from a real wound, from genuine hope. But the collective mind turned it into a slogan, into a passive mantra, and repeating "soon" as an eternal promise became a polite way to postpone life. Saying soon is telling the universe, wait. It's telling your soul, not yet. Not yet my dreams. Not yet my peace. Not yet my freedom. And when life is postponed, it dims. The intention of art was to awaken us, but the noise turned it into anesthesia. Now, in the midst of so much individual seeking, the collective mind has begun to understand the language of the universe, and more, it realizes it's not about saying soon. It's about saying now. Because your journey, the human journey, your brief organic flight, is nothing less than a revolution. It's like paddling a kayak through a rapid filled with foam, wind, and destiny. That's what being alive feels like. That's what it means to play the funny game of the collective mind. A game that reminds us love is the simplest thing of all, like the sun, life pouring in torrents. Love is art happening inside the body. That's why collective memory tastes like Beethoven's Ode to Joy and Ricky Martin's Livin' La Vida Loca. It tastes like Mercedes-Benz, like classics, like unforgettable goals. It tastes like blood, sin, pandemic, glory, death, and Cristiano Ronaldo's roaring "Sí." Because that too is humanity. There's no need to fight it. We're meant to dance it, to live it, to sing it, and to keep remembering that even as everything accelerates, optimizes, digitizes, the sacred remains untouched by code. It's what vibrates, what falters, what loves. In a quiet corner of the world where few ever look, something happened that's worth remembering. A love story. Not the kind that starts with fireworks and ends in silence, but the kind born from a shared laugh and nourished by two souls facing the same direction, even if the map makes no sense. They met at a bakery. He tripped carrying a tray of croissants. She laughed so hard she sneezed. It was love at first clumsiness. From that day on, they stumbled through life together, almost daily. At 20, they swore eternal love, not knowing what it meant. At 30, they began to suspect that forever wasn't a promise, it was a practice. At 40, they stopped making vows and began to see each other with the eyes of those who no longer need proof. They had 3 kids, 5 moves, 1 anxious pet, a business that went under, and an endless list of inside jokes that no one else found funny. They argued like tuning an instrument. They made up like coming home after a storm. She'd say he had a gift for complicating the simple. He'd say she had the superpower of remembering everything but what mattered least. And still, they chose each other. Every day. Even when they didn't say it out loud. Even when part of them wanted to choose otherwise. Real love doesn't always look like love. Sometimes it looks like fatigue, or routine, or questions without answers. But that's where the real part begins, when you stop expecting the other to complete you and just want them to walk beside you, when perfection matters less than presence. At 50, They noticed their bodies had changed. She didn't laugh quite as loud. He didn't drop trays anymore, but his memory began to trip. Still, one night, without saying a word, they danced in the kitchen to a song with no rhythm, only memory. That's when they realized love isn't eternal because it lasts long. It's eternal because it leaves marks in places nothing else can touch. At 60, they no longer celebrated anniversaries. They celebrated shared silences, knowing glances, gestures no one else understood. When one fell ill, the other became nurse, chauffeur, cook, and clown. When one grew weary, the other became pillow, breath, and laughter. At 70, their grandchildren asked for the secret. He said, "We laughed even when we didn't want to." She said, "We stayed quiet when we didn't know what to say." At 80, she started forgetting things. He repeated stories, but they still held hands like it was the first time, because the body may tire, but the gesture endures. Real love has wrinkles. It has scars. It has gray days and magical Sundays. It smells like reheated coffee and unsent letters. It has moments of wanting to run, but chooses to stay. Because true love isn't perfect. It's organic. It lives. It shifts. It stumbles. It laughs at itself. And it never fits inside a filtered quote on Instagram. It's art unfolding inside two bodies that honor each other. It's a film without a script, but with a soundtrack that makes the soul cry. At 90, she passed first. He said he knew from that first sneeze. He said goodbye with a line that wasn't romantic, but was true. "Thanks for putting up with me." And in his final years, all he did was tell their story. Not as a victim, but as someone grateful to have shared the ride. Someone once asked if he'd fall in love again. He replied, "No, nothing was left unsaid. I loved all of it, even the parts I didn't understand." And so, between goodbyes and slow lunches, faded photos and laughter still hanging in the air, he left this world with a simple certainty. Love is the only thing time can't erase. The only thing that, if real, remains. Because love isn't what's said. It's what still lingers in the air after nothing is said. And now that you know this, don't waste your time searching for love where it shines. Look for it where it breathes, where it stumbles, where it doesn't look perfect but feels true. Because if there's one thing we came to this planet to learn, amid all the algorithms, all the filters, all the goals, it's how to love like we knew nothing else. Because there's no deeper art than staying when the world says leave. No app can replace the grip of a hand that holds you just before you break. No update can compete with a laugh that only you understand. Love isn't a goal, it's a game. A clumsy, chaotic, sweet, maddening, imperfect game. But when you play it with soul, it becomes eternal. Like them, like you, like everything never said but always felt. Posting pictures, the Nordic filter, the hashtag of the day, everything flawless, everything viral, everything immaculately staged, except them. Because what the photos didn't show was that Carla had been sleeping on the couch for 3 months, and Matthias had a draft saved he never dared to send. I'm not sure about this, but no one wants to disappoint the collective mind. So they kept going. They bought a house they couldn't afford, hosted dinners with people they didn't like, decorated with quotes they didn't feel, and said, "I love you," like it was just a dressed-up hello. All to belong, all to keep the story going, all to avoid disappointing that invisible judge who claps when you do what's expected, even if you're breaking inside. One day, Carla found an old sketch hidden in Matthias's books. It was a little house in the countryside with a garden, dogs, mountains. A note scribbled in shaky handwriting read, "What I truly want." She cried. Not because of what she saw, but because of what she realized. Neither of them was living the life they had once dreamed. That night there was no fight, no drama, just silence. And in that silence they told each other more truths than in all the years they'd shared. Matthias confessed he had always wanted to study philosophy, but his father said it wouldn't pay the bills. Carla admitted she never wanted children, but had already bought the stroller, just in case. They looked at each other. No blame, no resentment, only the brutal tenderness of two people who had loved each other in the wrong language. And there, in that messy kitchen, between a cold slice of pizza and a candle that had long lost its scent, they decided to separate. Not because they didn't love each other, but because they were tired of living a lie. That story never went viral. It didn't get likes. It wasn't shared on TikTok, but it changed lives. Carla moved in alone for the first time. She learned to bake bread, to read without guilt, to say no without trembling. Matthias quit his job, sold his car, and went back to school. Today he teaches philosophy in a public school where he helps kids learn how to think for themselves. Sometimes they text, not to get back together, just to say thank you, because they learned something no one teaches. Love doesn't have to last forever to be true. And the greatest act of love is to let go when staying would mean betraying yourself. And you know what? No one understood them. They were called selfish, crazy, told that marriage is about fighting for it, that love is sacrifice. But they smiled, because they knew something the others hadn't discovered yet. Real loyalty isn't to another person. It's to yourself. And that loyalty, that internal coherence, that rare ability to say, this isn't for me when the world is clapping, now that is how you hack the collective mind. Many people before you decided what was right. Others repeated it until it stopped sounding like a decision and started feeling like a fact. What we call culture is just collective memory on autopilot. A set of habits no one dared to question because they were already on sale at the store of normal. We call it common sense, but it makes little sense and it's not all that common. It's just the most repeated thing, like yawns, like guilt, like trends. And in this global theater, we've been taught to applaud scenes we don't feel, to say that's life when we don't understand a thing, to call success whatever everyone seems to want, even if no one actually enjoys it, to label the unexplainable, to price the sacred, to fear being the only sane one in a world that believes it's fine. In a corner of the world where few ever look, something happened that's worth remembering. It was just a Tuesday, the kind that smells like routine. A man got off at the wrong bus stop and found himself in front of a vegan church. Yes, a vegan church. They didn't pray to God, they prayed to tofu. At the altar, a massive LED screen played motivational quotes in Siri's voice over a backdrop of singing whales. "You are not your thoughts," said the enlightened tofu, while a woman in solar yoga pants applauded like she had just seen Buddha roll by on a skateboard. The man didn't understand a thing, but he had nowhere else to be, so he sat down and he listened. A bearded guy with a spiral-shaped beard began speaking about the quantum ego of lettuce and how to heal ancestral trauma through Wi-Fi fasting. People cried. He did too, but from laughter. At some point, the spiral beard said something that struck him hard. The collective mind doesn't need meaning. It needs entertainment, because what doesn't entertain is not remembered, and what is not remembered doesn't exist. He left feeling like he'd witnessed either a parody of humanity or its exact summary. He wasn't sure which. He only knew that inside that absurdity was a truth he didn't yet have words for. For weeks, that thought haunted him. He'd open the fridge and hear the tofu. He'd go to work and see his colleagues act like human apps, reporting emotions, logging out, updating statuses. He saw the collective mind in every gesture, in every repeated phrase, in every automatic laugh at a recycled meme. And then he got it. No one thinks alone. We all think plugged into a cloud of borrowed ideas, inherited fears, and prefab answers. That's when he did what so many dream of and so few dare. He shut it all off. Socials, news, notifications, tags, filters, playlists. And in the silence, he heard something else. Something that didn't pulse like TikTok. something that didn't speak like a bargain bin guru, something that felt like him. On the 20th day of his digital detox, he found an old notebook. Inside, a line underlined in teenage fury. "Everything I think is not my own thought." He laughed, because now he got it. He'd spent a lifetime as a spokesperson for ideas he never chose. And for the first time, he could choose, not what to think, but where to think from. The game of the collective mind is brilliant. It makes you feel free while it steers you with algorithms, makes you feel deep while it traps you in slogans, makes you believe you're unique while you share quotes half the planet already posted. But there's a crack, and through that crack, light enters. When you start seeing the game as a game, you stop being a pawn and start being a player. And that's when questions appear, questions too big to fit in a tweet. Why do I repeat what I repeat? Who wrote my thoughts? What's my voice underneath all the borrowed ones? The collective mind is not the enemy. It's the stage. What you do on that stage, that's your responsibility. You can be just another character, saying what's expected, doing what's expected, celebrating what everyone celebrates. Or you can step off the script, rewrite the role, create a story where the strangest thing is the realest thing. And no, this isn't an invitation to be different. That too has become a brand. Today, everyone wants to be unique using the same damn filter. No, this is something else. A call to be honest, brutally honest, to stop pretending to be free and finally live it, even if it doesn't look good on your feed. The tofu man never returned to the vegan church. But every now and then, when the world feels a bit too serious, he buys a lettuce shaped like a heart and places it on his shelf, not as a symbol of belief, but as a reminder that this whole thing is a cosmic joke, beautifully told, and that the best way to honor life is to laugh, to love, to question, and to breathe, even at the edge of absurdity. The collective mind is still there, but now he sees it differently, not to destroy it, but so it doesn't destroy him. Because in the end, it's not about turning off the world. It's about turning yourself on, from the inside out, like a torch that doesn't need a temple, an algorithm, or permission. Just presence, just awareness, just the will to live, truly live. And that, perhaps, is the real game. One where laughter, clarity, and tenderness have more power than any dogma. One where the soul doesn't need to go viral to feel alive. And yes, it all began with a talking tofu. Here we are, waking up in the middle of a civilization that thinks it's fully alive just because it has Wi-Fi, yet has forgotten how to speak with trees, with silence, and with its own soul. We're born into a world where thousands of people get the word freedom tattooed on their skin without ever having a single serious conversation with themselves. We live on a planet where a video of someone dancing in a cow costume at the supermarket goes viral, while the wisdom of the ancients is left to freeze in the back shelves of collective amnesia. And this isn't judgment, it's a photograph. And like all good photographs, it forces us to look more closely. Individuality is sold to us like the latest evolutionary upgrade. But the real noise isn't made by the individual. It comes from the collective mind. That invisible hive where we're all connected, infected, programmed. There is no your thought that doesn't come with a label of origin. From how you love to how you frown when you're upset, everything is inherited. The collective mind of humanity is the great unseen author behind your reactions. And that's the great game. The fun, dangerous, maddening, fascinating game of the collective mind. The one where we believe we're free while following patterns we never designed. Where we say things like, to each their own, while everything we believe has been simmered in the soup of generational thought. A game where we throw around the word karma like it's some exotic punishment, forgetting that there's such a thing as collective karma, the silent weight we carry just by being born human. And there's the joke, the cosmic punchline. All of humanity gambling away its meaning while arguing online about whether the earth is flat or aliens are already among us selling insurance. Because laughter is also evolution. And if we don't learn to laugh at our absurdities, we'll end up crying with dignity, but without any real solution. There are wounds that make no sound. They don't scream, but they ache in silence. They hide in the way someone stops asking how you are, in the texts that go unanswered, in smiles that become defense mechanisms. These are the pains dressed up as normalcy. They go to work, they pay their bills, they celebrate birthdays, they even crack jokes. But inside, they're vacant. There are people living like empty houses with the lights on, and no one notices because the facade is still standing. The collective mind calls them successful, functional, charming. But inside, it's a different story. The quiet theater of those who break without noise, of those who never ask for help because they were taught sadness doesn't match the color scheme of Instagram. That to be fragile is to lose the game. But sometimes, healing isn't about winning. It's about breaking in the right place, with the right words, at the right time. That's what happened to Lucia. Lucia was 36 and had a perfect life, or so her profile said. Her account was a symphony of travel, flower-topped breakfasts, beach selfies with her husband, inspirational quotes in vintage font, and a Pixar-grade smile. She ran a digital marketing business, had a stable relationship, 2 cats named after Buddhist monks, and a calendar full of purpose-aligned commitments. She meditated at 6, practiced yoga at 7, answered emails by 8, and by 10, she'd already saved the world in a polished LinkedIn post. But something started to itch. At first, it was just a strange hollowness, a yawn of the soul. Nothing painful, just uncomfortable, like a shoe half a size too small. Then came the insomnia, the shallow breathing, the tears that came for no reason while staring into the fridge. And then came the moment her husband asked what was wrong, and she had no answer. It wasn't sadness, it wasn't stress, it was a crack, a fracture in the wall of her mind. I don't know who I am disguised as I need a vacation. Lucia tried to fix it. She bought a new planner, took a course in inner abundance through vibrational coaching, changed the tone of her Instagram stories, read 3 more self-help books, attended a silent retreat, but the crack remained, quieter, deeper, realer. Until one Sunday night after a gathering with other spiritual couples, something simple and irreversible happened. A friend laughed and said, "Sometimes I think we're all just acting, like this is a cult with better branding." Everyone laughed. Lucia didn't. Something snapped. Because in that moment, with a brutal clarity only intuition can deliver, she realized that was exactly her life. A performance. A script she didn't write. A character she couldn't keep playing. That night, she sat in front of the mirror. Literally. She removed the makeup, the yoga outfit, the mantras. She looked at herself as if seeing a stranger, as if she were her 6-year-old daughter. And for the first time in a long time, she asked, "Who am I without all this?" She didn't get an answer, just tears. Wild, messy, liberating tears. Tears from every forced birthday. Every quote she posted but didn't believe. Every "I'm fine" said with a crushed throat. Tears that weren't asking for comfort, just space. And in that space, something new emerged, a phrase, one she didn't remember ever thinking before. "I don't owe anyone anything." That night, Lucia shut down her account. Not a pause, not a break. She deleted everything, not as an escape, but as a return. She called her husband and said she needed time alone, not because she didn't love him, but because she had lost her own voice. And without that, no dialogue is possible. She went to her grandmother's house, a little place that smelled of fresh bread and open windows. She spent weeks there saying nothing smart, sharing no learnings, showing no progress. She simply existed. She slept, walked, ate what was there, and little by little she began to write. not for the public, not to teach, just to understand. One afternoon, her grandmother asked why she cried so much. Lucia answered, "Because I'm remembering who I was before I tried to be someone." And with a soul-cutting tenderness, her grandmother replied, "Then you're not crying. You're being born." That phrase stayed with her. Later, she tattooed it on her wrist. "I'm being born." Lucia came back. But she didn't return the same. Not to social media, not to the same version of her business. She returned slower, more honest, more broken, yes, but more hers. She no longer created content. She created presence. She no longer spoke of abundance. She spoke of silence. She no longer pretended to be okay. She was alive. And that, honestly, is far braver. That's how she hacked the collective mind. Not with a manifesto, not with a rebellion, with a renunciation, with a deep no, with an inhabited crack. Because sometimes to change the world, you don't need to announce it. You just need to be it. And she, in her fragility, in her renunciation, in her truth, became a light that didn't need a stage. Lucia never taught again, but those who met her afterward learned something that no one can explain without living it. That true freedom is not doing whatever you want. It's no longer being what you are not. And in that moment, the game of the collective mind loses a player and a human being is born. There's something wildly absurd about all this, but also wildly beautiful. The ever-present opportunity to learn the game where our lives are at stake. The game that lets us laugh and breathe through cultures, languages, cities, systems, but above all, through a name, an identity, a self in progress, a way of thinking, of moving, of being, of creating. Think about this. If the collective mind exists, if this vast inheritance of humanity gave us supermarkets, pharmacies, schools, science, art, technology, then surely the possibility also exists to hack it, to make it work for us. And that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to undress it, observe it, play it from the inside, not to destroy it, but to use it as a mirror, as a trampoline, as a cosmic joke that, once understood, no longer hurts, but sets you free. So how do you hack the collective mind? How do you play this game without becoming just another pawn on the board? Some try with spiritual retreats, others with sarcastic elegance. Some seek it out traveling the world, and others surrender on the comfort of their couch. But there's a path that's always there, available, radical, beautiful, lucid awareness, no solemnity, no posturing, no fanaticism, awareness that watches, laughs, learns, and creates. One morning, in an ordinary city, a guy named Julian decided to break routine with something simple. He left the house without his phone. It wasn't a big idea. It wasn't even an idea. It was more like a frustration disguised as an impulse. His group of friends had been fighting for weeks over a meme. His mom blocked him on WhatsApp for not reacting to a good morning video. His boss asked for an urgent meeting to talk about his emoji tone. And Julian, without planning, without posting about it, disconnected from everything. For 2 hours, he walked through the city as if he were seeing it for the first time, as if he'd just fallen from the sky. He watched people crossing the streets without looking up, hypnotized by screens. He saw a couple arguing without once lifting their eyes from their phones. He heard a child ask his father if dogs also had Wi-Fi. On one corner, a man was shouting that the end of the world had arrived, but no one heard him because he wasn't live streaming. Julian turned down an old street in the center, one that smelled of warm bread and thyme. And there, in the middle of the digital noise, he saw something strange. A hand-painted sign, "I fix things no one fixes." He walked in. The place was a mix of workshop, library, and museum of forgotten things. A man in his 70s with the hands of a craftsman and the eyes of a curious child greeted him without words. He simply pointed to a chair. "What do you need fixed?" he asked, his voice sounding like crumpled paper. Julian, not knowing why, replied, "My head or my soul, I'm not sure." The old man wasn't surprised. He walked to a shelf and pulled down a jar with colorful labels: inherited fears, borrowed guilt, looping thoughts, dangerous silences. These are the things young people bring me most, stuff that doesn't belong to them, but they carry anyway. Sometimes they even defend it, he said, offering a tea that smelled like childhood and disobedience. Julian laughed. He felt that the place had magic, but not the fairy tale kind, real magic. The kind that happens when someone listens to you without trying to correct you, sell you something, or convince you of the latest trend, dating app, or happiness strategy. They talked for hours about the fear of not fitting in, about anxiety dressed up with cool names, about college majors no one wants but everyone chooses, about the need to have an opinion on everything, even when no one understands anything, about how everyone seems to be acting out a character they don't remember choosing but already bought the costume for. The old man said something that tattooed itself into Julian's mind. The collective mind is like an old GPS. It keeps guiding you down roads that no longer exist, but you follow them because everyone else does. And if you dare to get off the route, it recalculates. Always recalculates. Not because it knows where you're going, but because it can't stand being ignored. Before leaving, Julian looked around. There were clocks with no hands, mirrors without reflections, telephones that only received whispers. Nothing served its original purpose, but everything felt perfectly in place, as if the useless was the most honest. He walked out of the workshop without answers, but with far less noise. He walked home, turned his phone back on, but didn't open any apps. Instead, he opened his notebook and wrote, "I didn't come here to fit in. I came to remember." From that day on, whenever he felt himself dissolving into the crowd, into the trends, into the soul's hashtags, Julian would return to that place. Sometimes in his mind, sometimes in person, but always with the same intention. To remember that thinking differently isn't an act of rebellion, it's an act of sanity. Because if the whole world is running in the same direction without ever asking why, maybe the real madness isn't in stopping to sit on the side of the road and just watch the scenery for a while. Imagine a man walking through the city wearing a bathrobe, sunglasses, and holding a sign that says, "I'm not weird, you're just repeated." Maybe someone records him. Maybe he goes viral. Maybe they turn him into a meme. But maybe, just maybe, someone sees him and smiles on the inside. Because maybe he's not that crazy. Because if you think about it, most people are living a life they didn't design, running a race they never chose, repeating thoughts that were never theirs. And what if the truly insane ones are those who follow instructions without ever asking who wrote them? Let's talk about success, for instance. When did we decide that success meant having more stuff than everyone else? At what point did abundance turn into accumulation and happiness into a calendar milestone? The collective mind rewards those who arrive first, not those who arrive joyful. It applauds those who produce, not those who find themselves. Deep down, we were raised to perform, not to bloom, to belong, not to shine. And yet, history is filled with sages and rebels who broke the game. People who were called crazy, weird, dangerous, until time proved them right. Jesus, Nietzsche, Buddha, Lenin, Mario Benedetti, Alan Watts, Maria Montessori, Krishnamurti, people like Jim Carrey and Keanu Reeves, people who didn't conform, who saw the matrix or the collective mind from the inside and chose not to copy it. Sometimes all it takes is a single question to start a revolution. Why? Why do we do what we do? Why do we dress this way? Why do we love like this? Why do we laugh at some things and not others? Why are we offended by certain things? Why can't we stand silence? Why are we so afraid to be alone when we were born alone and will die alone? Why are we constantly searching for something that never seems to arrive? The game of the collective mind is built on a delicate balance between the fear of rejection and the longing to belong. It's an emotional game, not a logical one. That's why theories don't work. That's why data doesn't change the world. What changes the world is experience, the click, that quiet inner rupture or ignition. And here, we're here to ignite, not with pressure, not with formulas, but with ideas that touch the soul, that make you think, that make you laugh, that leave you deliciously unsettled. Ideas like pebbles in the shoe of your spirit, small discomforts that force you to change direction. Because deep down, we're all looking for the same thing, to feel alive. And there is no greater act of rebellion than daring to live from within yourself. Chapter 2. The Manual for Stepping Out of Character Without Anyone Noticing. Living is an experiment without instructions. Yet the world insists on handing you some. From the moment you arrive, someone gives you a name, a gender, a nationality, a religion, a school, a way of speaking, a way of thinking, and, just in case, a list of goals you must achieve to make your existence valid. It doesn't matter if those goals make sense to you. What matters is that you accomplish them. Because if you don't, you're out of the game. And being out of the game, in this world, means disappearing. The strangest part is that almost no one really knows what the game is about. But everyone acts like they do. Like arriving at a party that started hours ago, where everyone is laughing at something you don't understand. So you just pretend to get the joke. That's the collective mind. A system of customs, thoughts, beliefs, and emotions that moves like a vast choreography where no one leads, but everyone dances, even if they don't know why. So we spend years, decades, entire lives trying to fit into a dance we never chose. We smile when we're supposed to smile, cry when it's allowed. We get outraged by the same things everyone else does. We applaud those the crowd applauds. We cancel those the crowd condemns. And we repeat lines like, "I have my own opinion," while speaking in someone else's voice. But we're not here to moralize. We're here to look at the human theater with love and humor, to laugh with intelligence, to reflect without heaviness, to understand that all of us, even the most rebellious, are still playing the same game to some degree. Because being human is also this, participating in the game while slowly waking up inside it. In a corner of the world, where few look, something happened worth remembering. A 6-year-old girl stood in the middle of the living room during a family gathering and said, her voice trembling, "When I grow up, I want to be invisible." Everyone laughed. Her uncle hugged her and said, "But you're so pretty. Why would you want to hide?" She didn't answer. She just lowered her eyes as if the question were too big for her age or too small for her pain. What no one noticed was that on that very day the little girl began to disappear. First, she stopped dancing in front of others. Then she stopped drawing unless given permission. Later, she learned to apologize for feelings she didn't feel and to smile even when her heart was breaking. By 11, she could fake confidence. At 15, she believed love meant pleasing others. By 20, she knew rebellion came with consequences. And by 30, she realized that nearly everything she was had not been her choice. That girl, with time, became many people. She became you. She became me. She became anyone who ever learned that to be loved meant to be accepted, and that being accepted meant playing a role with good grades, healthy meals, no difficult questions, no yelling, no crying in public, a role that fit in, even if it hurt, even if it erased her. That's how it all starts, not with a grand conspiracy, not with catastrophe. It starts with a smile that isn't yours, a yes you didn't mean, an applause you didn't understand, but copied. It's subtle, it's slow, but it's effective. They call it parenting. They call it education. They call it love. And often it is. But it's also the first offering of the soul to the collective mind. Childhood is an emotional obedience boot camp. That's where we learn what's expected of us. And the worst part isn't that they tell us. We learn to anticipate it, to become what others need us to be, even before they ask. That's when borrowed thoughts begin to form, the ones we use as our own, but which carry the invisible signature of those we most wanted to please. We were programmed with lines like, "Be good," "Don't embarrass the family," "Boys don't cry," "Be strong," "Be successful," "Make it count." And we forgot to ask, for whom? The danger in these phrases isn't that they're cruel. It's that they sound reasonable. The virus doesn't enter through hate. It enters through logic. Because the system doesn't enslave you with chains. It guides you with well-meaning advice. It trains you to survive, yes, but not to be you. It teaches you to fit in, not to shine. It forms you to be useful, not to be free. And here's the first brutal twist. We were programmed to be loved, not to be real. And it worked, at least for a while. Because it gave us belonging, belonging gave us affection, and affection gave us safety. But one day, without a clear date, something inside begins to break. Not dramatically, quietly. A doubt, a yawn of the soul, a discomfort, the intuition that something is wrong, even if everything looks right. It's the soul knocking from the inside. That's the day the real game begins. The collective mind doesn't just tell us what to think. It tells us how to love, how to dress, what to dream, when to cry, how much our life is worth. And that script isn't in one place. It's in all of them, in television, in school books, in advertisements, in religion. In the movies we watched 1,000 times without knowing they were teaching us something more than entertainment. And no, it's not anyone's fault, because all of us, unknowingly, are repeating what we were taught. Just like flame passes from one candle to another, borrowed thought is transmitted from soul to soul. Some amplify it, others question it, but all receive it. And in one way or another, we spend our lives demanding freedom with a voice that isn't ours. Who taught us to fear looking foolish? Who explained that reason was more valuable than emotion? Who decided that growing up meant stopping play? Who dictated that happiness must come in the shape of achievement? When a child laughs for no reason, they're told to grow up. When an adult laughs for no reason, people ask if they're okay. Spontaneity is suspicious, authenticity, a radical act, enthusiasm, a rarity. Everything that vibrates high, the collective mind translates as too much, because a free soul threatens a domesticated one, and what threatens gets regulated. And here comes the most delicate jewel. We are not victims of this. We are participants, because at some point we chose to keep playing, and that's okay. We did it to survive. But now it's time to play with awareness. It's time to look directly at that system of ideas, habits, and mandates, not to destroy it, but to pause it, to breathe, to ask if that costume still fits. As Osho said, maturity is having the courage to be who you are, even if it means standing alone. The good news is, we are not alone. There's a quiet army of awakening souls, people who one day realized their lives were echoes, that their thoughts did not represent them, that their happiness had no voice of its own, and they took a step, not toward a revolution, but toward sincerity. In a corner of the world where few look, something happened that never made the news, never went viral, never became a song. It was just a domestic revelation, like suddenly remembering you left the stove on. Only this time, it was life that was boiling over, and no one had noticed. The collective mind had told us, again and again, that life was about sacrifice, responsibility, duty, maturity, control. And we forgot something essential. We came here to play. Yes, brother, sister, reader, traveler, we came to play. This planet is not an exam, it's a stage. This experience is not a punishment, it's a dance. You don't have to beat anyone. You just have to dance it well. And in that game, the most absurd and sublime of all, things happen to you. You break, you fall in love, you cry because you lost your keys, you laugh because you found a hug, your teeth hurt, your soul hurts, your pride hurts. Sometimes they reject you, sometimes they applaud you, and all of it, absolutely all of it, is part of the game. But the problem isn't playing badly. It's forgetting that you were playing. Forgetting that laughter counts as progress. That dancing in the kitchen to an old song is also spiritual evolution. That watching a silly movie and crying with popcorn is a form of meditation. That life doesn't measure you by your achievements, but by your capacity to love again after failure. We're so busy trying to be useful, to look enlightened, to reach goals, that we forget to just sit and watch the sunset without needing to post a photo. We think living means producing. That enjoyment is wasting time, that making mistakes is a sin. And just like that, without realizing, we become employees of duty. And duty, when it has no joy, becomes a prison. The soul didn't come here to be filled with rules. It came to experience, to get messy, to sing out of tune, to arrive late and still be welcomed. Because the universe isn't made of answers. It's made of questions, lived beautifully. If you can love, laugh. If you can walk, dance. If you can feel, don't explain it. And if something hurts, hold it until it transforms. Sometimes, a single burst of laughter is enough to dismantle 20 years of repression. Sometimes, a sincere glance is all it takes for two people to forgive everything they never knew how to say. Don't take yourself so seriously. The ego is already doing that for you. Don't pressure yourself to save the world. The world also needs someone to remind it that being here is still worth it. That there are still people who look up at the sky as if it were a poem. That there are still hands reaching for each other with no plan, no contract, no map. That there are still laughs that erupt at the most inappropriate moment, and that's exactly what makes them sacred. And yes, there is pain. And yes, there is loss. And yes, there are days when everything falls apart. But even there, even in the middle of collapse, life whispers a joke, and those who hear it are saved. Not by greeting card spirituality, not by fridge magnet phrases, by humanity, raw, real, tender, like yours, like mine, like Jim Carrey making us cry from laughter, like Roberto Gomez Bolaños tripping to show us that falling gracefully is also a form of art, like so many who are no longer here, but who left behind a laugh floating in the air so we don't forget how it's done. This book isn't a manual. It's a literary mischief, an invitation to remember that the collective mind is just a cloud of inherited ideas, but the soul is free. Free to love someone who doesn't fit the mold. Free to create without asking for permission. Free to say, "I don't know," with a smile. Free to look at life like a child waking up in a world of impossible colors. So if you fall, do it with style. If you get lost, take the opportunity to discover something. If you break, laugh while picking up the pieces. And if everything goes well, shout it. And if everything goes wrong, make up a song, because that's who we are. Players in a mad game that no one fully understands. But that is still worth playing. Because this game, brother, sister of light, isn't won or lost. It's lived. And if you live it with joy, it's always a victory. And that victory begins with noticing, really paying attention to how borrowed thought works. That kind of thought that loops inside your head and makes you dance to music you never chose. And the worst part is, you can't blame anyone for putting that song on. Time did. History did. The grandmother who taught you to stay quiet so as not to embarrass the family. The teacher who told you not to ask so many questions because that's not on the test. The influencer who spoke about self-love in tutorial tone with a 4K camera. Society as a whole, with its beauty filters, its success rankings, and its microwave-heated motivational quotes. And you just wanted to be you, but you ended up as an editable version of yourself, with subtitles approved by the audience. So now it's a good time to pause, to breathe, to look at the game from above. Alan Watts said that the problem with Western thought is that we've confused the map with the territory, that we've forgotten words or signposts, not destinations, that saying, I'm a lawyer, I'm a woman, I'm poor, I'm strong, I'm free, means nothing if we've never asked from where those I ams were built. Because language is beautiful, yes, but it's also a prison with large windows. It lets us see the world, but it imposes shapes, inherited shapes. That's why, when someone says, this is just how I am, a part of you should suspect. Not out of distrust, but compassion. Because most people who say, this is just how I am, are really saying, this is how I was taught to be, and I don't know how to stop. And that's where the fun begins. Because if we're already in the game, why not hack it from the inside? Why not play it with humor, with art, with irony? Why not turn the collective mind into a stage instead of a prison? Look, if we're going to talk about awakening, a good laugh is non-negotiable. And if anyone understood this, it was the master Groucho Marx. I don't want to belong to any club that would accept me as a member, he said. And without knowing it, he handed us a brutal key to authenticity. Because what the collective mind wants is adherence. It wants you to join, to identify, to wear the jersey, even if you don't understand the game. But the true sages have always been allergic to mental uniforms. That's why they were called crazy. That's why they were written out of the family album. That's why their ideas took centuries to bloom. Buddha was a prince who gave everything up to sit under a tree. Nietzsche declared God dead while embracing a horse in the middle of the street. Krishnamurti spent half his life saying, please don't follow me, don't turn this into a religion. And they founded one anyway. Even Jesus, who didn't have social media, ended up with fan clubs he never endorsed. And do you know why? Because they all told the truth. But the truth without makeup isn't charming. It burns. It shakes you. It makes you uncomfortable. That's why the collective mind prefers light versions of the wise. It strips the irony from Buddha, the madness from Jesus, the silence from Toll. It turns them into spiritual emojis, easy to swallow. But we didn't come here to be digestible. We came to be indigestible, to be questions, not slogans, to be cracks, not molds. And on this path of deprogramming, there's one infallible trick: lucid humor. Because if you can't laugh at yourself, you're still stuck in the ego. And if you can't laugh at the system, you're still inside the system. Humor is not superficial. It's wisdom in laughter. It's awareness dressed as a joke. It's what makes the unbearable breathable. As Facundo Cabral said, if bad people knew how profitable it is to be good, they'd be good, just for business. Genius. And speaking of Cabral, he too lived the collective mind game from the inside. He was poor, illiterate, rejected, yet he wrote songs that resurrect souls. How? Because he disobeyed the logic of the system. Because his success wasn't planned. It was surrendered. Because his greatest rebellion was saying, I don't agree with most things, but I laugh anyway. And that's another big clue. Awareness doesn't have to be solemn. True awareness laughs at church, cries on the subway, dances alone in the kitchen. It doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't follow protocol. And above all, it doesn't take itself too seriously. Because it understands that this world is theater, but sacred theater, not to act with rigidity, but to play with mastery. ChatGPT Plus. True enlightenment is laughing at every version of yourself without losing respect. You don't need to travel to India or spend $10,000 on a retreat. You just need to observe, to ask questions, and to laugh while you observe. Like someone in the supermarket wondering, why is there a yogurt for every hour of the day? Or, what does it mean for a loaf of bread to be mindful? Misunderstood spirituality is incense-scented dogma. Productivity without soul is a cage with Wi-Fi. Success without presence is just anxiety in makeup. And freedom without awareness is just noise. That's why Jesus didn't come to hand out formulas. He came to empty the ones you already had. When he said, "The last shall be first," he wasn't talking about social rank. He was speaking about inner posture. That humble place, free of rigid certainties, where ego isn't dressed in wisdom's clothing. That place where the soul doesn't compete, it simply breathes. His message wasn't meant to provide answers. It came to shatter a single idea, the idea that every thought you think is yours. Because if you can doubt that just once a day, you've already won. Not an argument, not a debate. You've won space. And in that space, the real game begins. One where you don't need to be an expert to be free. You just need to be empty, like someone who knows they don't know but dares to look anyway. In a corner of the world where few are watching, something happened worth remembering. It was a Tuesday. It always seems like these things happen on a Tuesday, not a particularly mystical or poetic day, just a day that smells like routine. And that's why the extraordinary hurts more. Mario was 42, 2 kids, a steady job, a kind wife, a bank account that didn't shine but wasn't gasping either, a life that looked like a perfectly framed photo. His shirt was always ironed, his smile always rehearsed. His schedule synced to the chaos of modern life, but inside there was noise. Not physical pain, not obvious anguish, something more subtle, an echo with no words, a discomfort that didn't know how to escape, as if his soul had aged before his body. That Tuesday, sitting in a meeting room, he stared at the TV's screensaver. A motivational quote scrolled endlessly. "You are the architect of your destiny." And Mario thought, what if I didn't design any of this? What if I've been following a blueprint handed to me without realizing it? It wasn't a revolutionary thought, but it was his crack. And through that crack, the click came. He didn't say anything. No one noticed his silent awakening. But that day, for the first time in his life, he went for a walk without a destination. He walked for 3 hours, saw children playing with cardboard boxes happier than he'd ever been with his latest phone, saw a woman yelling at her dog, then caressing it like a grandchild, saw a street artist painting a tree that didn't exist, but looking at it, it somehow felt real. And then he got it. His life was a painting made by others. His career was chosen by his father, his way of loving, his mother, his beliefs, his school, his goals, his bosses, his masculinity, a set of teenage phrases he never questioned, his desires, seasonal catalogs, his sorrow, a legacy from his grandfather. Everything he believed to be his was borrowed. That night, returning home, he did something that seemed small, but wasn't. He turned off the TV, not out of rejection, but out of respect, because he realized that every second of distraction was a betrayal of himself. He sat on the floor, picked up a journal he hadn't touched in years, and wrote, "Who am I if I stop following instructions?" He didn't have an answer, but he had questions, and that was more than enough. Weeks passed. Mario didn't become a monk. He didn't quit his job. He didn't fly to India seeking gurus. He simply started to look differently, to question, to stop responding automatically, to say, "I don't know," without shame, to say, "This doesn't represent me," with calm, to say, "This is me," even if it didn't have a name. One day, his 7-year-old son looked at him and said, "Dad, you used to be a robot. Now you're like a tree." "What does that mean?" "You're stiller, but more alive." And he was, because he'd stopped performing, because he began living from the inside, because he chose the thought he wanted to think, instead of repeating the one that had thought him. And if you notice, This story has no fireworks, no major drama, no epiphany with violins in the background. Just a crack, a question, an ordinary Tuesday, and an invisible decision that changed everything. The collective mind isn't hacked through speeches. It's hacked through small acts of awareness, through moments of clarity seeded in the everyday, through that instant when you stop clapping out of reflex and start observing out of love. Because it's not about destroying what you've learned. It's about choosing how you want to look at it again. And in that process, brother of light, it's worth remembering that the soul doesn't crave absolute truths. It craves living questions, questions that breathe, questions not answered with words, but with presence. That's why the real revolution doesn't begin with a scream. It begins with a silence, one that doesn't run, one that listens. And yes, sometimes that silence comes in the middle of a grocery aisle, as you choose between 20 kinds of bread that all taste the same. Sometimes it arrives in the shower, when there's nothing to do but feel the water. Sometimes it shows up through a meme everyone shares, but that makes you cry for reasons you can't explain. And sometimes it's sparked by the simplest phrase in the world. This doesn't make sense to me. That's where it begins. That's where the click is born. That's where the real game starts. In a corner of the world, where few are watching, something happened that no one knew how to interpret until it was too late. His name was Raoul. He was a psychologist, the kind of guy who quotes Jung at family dinners and has a mandala tattooed on his back that almost no one has seen, not because he hides it, just because he no longer needs to show it. Raoul lived between sessions, books, podcasts, and weekend workshops teaching how to reconnect with your essence. He did it well. He did it with honesty. But one day, after finishing a session where a woman broke down in tears and told him, "I don't know who I am," he too broke, quietly, inside, because he realized something. He didn't know who he was either. He had dedicated his life to guiding others toward awakening, while still asleep himself in a bed of concepts, models, theories, and functional masks. His message was flawless, his Instagram inspiring, his calendar full, but his soul packed with unanswered questions. That night, Raoul walked to the train station, not to go anywhere, just to watch those who were. He observed people rushing, glued to screens, chewing anxiety, running without asking where to. And he felt something that silently shattered him. Any one of those faces could be his. He returned home, opened an old journal, and wrote, "I'm afraid of living a life that looks conscious but is just more sophisticated than everyone else's." It wasn't arrogance, it was honesty. Because here's what few dare to admit. Even the most awakened can be trapped. Even those teaching freedom might be repeating another version of the script. A version with elevated vocabulary, Rumi quotes, breathing techniques, but a script all the same. The collective mind also knows how to wear spiritual clothing. Sometimes it doesn't hook you with Coca-Cola, but with ceremonial cacao. Not with television, but with talking circles. Not with noise, but with mantras. And that's not wrong. It's not that those paths don't work. It's that if you don't choose them from the soul, they become the same thing as before, just with better branding. A friendlier labyrinth, but still a labyrinth. Raoul understood that his awakening wouldn't be public. It wouldn't be posted. It wouldn't be celebrated with likes. It would be silent, like all true awakenings, the kind that have no witnesses, but change the very root of the one who lives them. So he made a radical decision. He canceled all his workshops for a month, closed his social media, called his patients and told them the truth. "I need to stop being a therapist for a while. I need to be human." Some felt abandoned, others inspired. He wasn't seeking either. He just wanted to listen to himself again. During those days, Raoul did the bravest thing someone with his level of knowledge can do. He began to unlearn. He read less and watched more, meditated less and walked more, spoke less and embraced himself more. He didn't run from pain. He listened to it. And on one of those days, he looked in the mirror and said, "I don't want to be another guru of pain. I want to be someone who has lived it and let it go, without turning it into identity." That was his liberation, his secret mantra, his point of no return. And when he returned to his practice, he did so differently. No longer from a role, from the soul, no longer with answers, with questions, not to heal anyone, but to accompany without interfering, to see without directing, to be present without needing to enlighten. One day, a new patient told him, "I've seen many therapists, but with you, I feel like you're not looking at me as a case." And Raul smiled, because that was it. Finally, he was seeing others without losing sight of himself. And that's the click, brother of light, that exact point where you stop playing a role, even a noble one, where you stop using consciousness as a personal brand, where you stop chasing enlightenment as if it were an Instagram competition, where you no longer want to convince anyone of anything. You just want to live whatever it is that makes your soul vibrate in peace. Because true freedom isn't published, it's lived. True awareness isn't promoted, it's breathed. True clarity doesn't shout. Sometimes it doesn't even speak. And it's there, in that honest silence, where we stop thinking what everyone else thinks, and a thought is finally born that is truly ours, authentic, organic, not inherited, not learned, felt, as if life were whispering, "Welcome, now you're truly alive." Chapter 3. Life After the Name. In this world, in this life, in this society, in this shared and curious collective memory, no one is entirely sane. And those who seem to be are simply lying with a grace that should be punishable by law. The human mind is like a monkey with Wi-Fi. It leaps from branch to branch, thought to thought, but now also receives memes, notifications, and foreign opinions in real time. It's no longer enough to be confused by your own thoughts. Now you also have to navigate collective bewilderment. But don't panic. We're not here to complain. This chapter is a celebration, a shared laugh in the face of absurdity. Because if there's one thing life teaches us, it's that when everything feels like a farce, laughter is an act of intelligence. And understanding what lies behind that farce, behind that mental script that insists everything it filters is real, is an act of freedom. In a corner of the world where few are looking, something happened that not even artificial intelligence could have predicted. And that's saying a lot. It was 4:35 in the afternoon. The office clock ticked in insistent red, as if trying to remind someone they were late for their destiny. Juan Martinez, an esteemed attorney, licensed in law and an expert in last-minute excuses, was going over his agenda for the 5th time. The air conditioner hummed with bureaucratic rhythm while he furrowed his brow, as if the page were hiding something important. "Damn, the dentist appointment," he muttered, pressing the intercom. "Maria, please cancel the 5 o'clock meeting and move it to tomorrow first thing. I've got to go now." Seconds later, without knocking, his office door flew open. Maria, his secretary, stormed in with a furrowed brow, arms crossed like two legal barriers, and a gaze that could intimidate the state Supreme Court itself. "Really, Juan? Leaving early again with another excuse? You must have made up with your wife and gone back into honeymoon mode." Juan looked at her like a kid caught with his hand in the cookie jar. "Come on, love, how could you say that? It's my dentist appointment. I really have to go. You know it's true. I have proof." But Maria didn't budge. "You've been doing this for weeks. No hotel, no dinner. You don't even look at me like you used to. No more heart emojis on WhatsApp. If this keeps up, Juan, I'm going to find myself a boyfriend who actually pays attention. I've got needs, too." Juan swallowed with diplomatic poise. "I swear it's just a phase. Give me a little more time," he pleaded, more like a prayer than a promise. She analyzed him, then softened her tone. "You've got over 60 minutes until your appointment. If we're quick, you'll still make it." Juan, always the litigator, even in love, weighed the offer. Brief silence. Then He took off his tie. Nothing else was said. The law and obligations were suspended. The office turned into a 5-star hotel, no check-in required. The encounter was urgent, intense, playful. Afterward, still buttoning his shirt and catching his breath, Juan turned to Maria. "Well, love, I'm off to brush my teeth. Almost time." 20 minutes later, he was reclined in the dentist's chair, confident he'd erased all evidence. The dentist, a bald man with latex gloves and the gaze of an emotional detective, leaned in to begin his inspection. At first, everything was normal. But after a few minutes, the dentist wrinkled his nose. Once, twice. Then stopped, leaned back, tried again, frowned. Finally, he couldn't help himself. "Excuse me, sir, by any chance have you recently had sex? I mean, did you just do the 69? Juan halted upright, flustered. "What did you say, doctor?" "I mean, did you just do the 69? Juan's blood drained to his feet, then surged back with a vengeance. He touched his mouth, his neck, his soul. "Doctor, what the hell? What's in my mouth? How do you know? Is something there?" The dentist took a deep breath and replied with the calm of a professional who doesn't want to alarm his patient, but absolutely will. "Your mouth's clean. Immaculate. Clearly you just brushed. But—" Juan looked at him, eyes brimming with ellipses. "But your forehead really smells like ass. And if you think about it, we've all walked through life at some point with something stuck to us that we didn't even know was there. We walk around with someone else's thoughts clinging to our skin like an old perfume we mistake for identity. And even when something smells off, we ignore it. Because those decisions we think are spontaneous are often just echoes, rehearsed repetitions, inherited ideas we've never questioned but wear like they're our own. We want to be right, but don't ask where that rightness comes from. We want to show cleanliness, success, balance. But the toughest residue to clean isn't in what we say. It's in what we don't smell. In that blind spot where judgment, unconsciousness, and the need to appear flawless accumulate. No matter how well you brush your thoughts, no matter how polished you sound on the outside, if you don't check your forehead, meaning if you don't observe yourself with honesty and humor, there'll always be a part of you that still smells like the character you're afraid to let go. And that is the real awakening. It's not about stopping the laughter. It's about laughing with awareness. Because if anything frees us more than a good question, it's a gut laugh that uncovers the mistake and reveals life. In a corner of the world where few are looking, something happened worth remembering. A boy named Nahuel had a habit of going barefoot into the yard each night, even when his mother warned him he'd catch a cold. He didn't do it to rebel. He did it by instinct. He liked feeling the cold earth under his feet. He said the night listened better that way. He was 7 years old, 2 loose teeth, and a question lodged right between his eyebrows. Why do we have to brush our teeth? One day he asked his father, who didn't have a great answer. He simply said, because otherwise they rot. And that was enough for a while. But children, like wise men, don't settle for functional answers. So Nahuel asked again, this time his grandfather. The old man looked at him with slow eyes, the kind that no longer rushed to teach, but simply to share. "Grandpa, why do we have to brush our teeth?" Nahuel asked, with the kind of seriousness only children and sages possess. The old man let silence think first. Then he looked at him with eyes that seemed to have witnessed every era. "Brushing your teeth, my boy. It's not just to stop them from rotting. It's a way of honoring history. A quiet way to say thank you to all of humanity that once lived without toothbrushes, clean water, or the slightest idea of what a cavity was, and still smiled. Thank you to who? To those who lived without anesthesia, without fluoride, without tutorials. To those who died simply because they didn't know how to do what you now do in 2 minutes, standing in front of a mirror. Every time you brush your teeth, whether you realize it or not, you're celebrating the fact that you belong to an era where living hurts just a little bit less. The boy listened like one listens to stories about real dragons. Nahuel didn't understand it all, but something inside him kept chewing on that idea like a piece of eternal gum. That night, before bed, he brushed his teeth like always. But then he stepped outside, barefoot, and looked up at the stars. And in that instant, something shifted. He realized there are people in the world with no teeth, no backyard, no mother to warn them about catching cold. That many humans in other times died from infections we now avoid in 2 minutes flat. And then he felt it. The collective mind, that cloud of inherited knowledge, has its blessings too. It's not all programming disguised as culture. Sometimes it's protection without drama. It's evolution on autopilot. Brushing your teeth isn't an imposition if you do it with gratitude. Most of our decisions aren't born from within us, but from an invisible chain of ideas that have been floating over our heads for centuries. Things we do just because that's how it's done, without knowing who did it first. And that, far from being a curse, can be an opportunity. Because if you learn to see with different eyes, the collective mind can become an ally, not to copy it, but to integrate it consciously. We can be thankful for modern medicine, without forgetting that clean air heals too. We can enjoy digital tools, without forgetting how to look someone in the eye. We can live in a city and still walk barefoot, even if it's just on the rooftop. The key is not to live to appear like you're living, not to breathe just to show you're breathing, not to exist as a post, but to exist as presence. And here comes one of time's beautiful paradoxes. The ancestral communities that never integrated into modern life often have the emotional health that the industrialized city is still desperately looking for. But it's also true that many of them died without access to something as basic as a toothbrush. So, who is more awake? The one walking barefoot under the sky, or the one who brushes their teeth knowing they're lucky to do so? The answer is, whoever does either thing with gratitude, the one who doesn't turn it into a blind habit, the one who lives it as a sacred act, the one who doesn't do it for the post, but doesn't hide either, the one who understands you don't have to choose between ancestral wisdom and modern technology. Because it's not a war, it's a dance. The collective mind is a current. You can let it carry you away or you can surf it with grace. And if you learn to do that, even the most mundane act, like brushing your teeth, becomes a ritual of gratitude, a declaration that you're alive, an act of love for your body, a smile for those who came before, those who will come after, and those who today cannot do what you're doing now. Brushing your teeth doesn't make you a better human, but being grateful you can does. That's what connects you. That's what tunes you. That's what turns you into an instrument, not just a user. Nahuel grew up, and he never stopped stepping into the backyard barefoot. But he learned to brush his teeth with joy. And every time someone asked why he smiled so much while doing it, he would say, "Because I'm doing it with myself, not against me." And that, dear soul brother, is the whole reason we're here. To remember that even within the system, we can dance with awareness. Some people believe they're free just because they don't wear a tie, but they're still bound to others' opinions like a cat in a sealed box. The mad ones, on the other hand, have one advantage. They don't need a costume to live in a carnival. What's strange is that in this tragic comedy we call society, the saner you seem, the more points you earn. As if the grand prize were a mortgage, 2 kids with early onset anxiety, and a funeral where no one knows what to say. And in the meantime, the collective mind keeps doing its job, like a bee addicted to order, buzzing through every gesture, colonizing every idea, turning every spark into a manual. But there comes a moment, just one, when the theater collapses. And that's where this chapter begins. Right in that instant when the soul quietly asks, what if none of this was ever mine? The collective mind feeds on many things, but mostly on fear. Fear of failure, rejection, loneliness, judgment, change, losing what was never ours to begin with. Fear disguised as prudence, logic, tradition, and that fear shapes our decisions without our noticing. How many times have you not done something just because you feared what people would say? How many times have you betrayed your intuition just to maintain the peace, the image, the contract, the applause? But there is a luminous crack, a crack where truth sneaks in, and that crack is called awareness. Awareness is not something lofty or distant. It's simply noticing. It's looking at what you do and asking yourself if it's yours or borrowed. It's watching your own thoughts the way you'd watch a drifting cloud, not chasing, not clinging, just observing, breathing, choosing again. Let's be clear. No one becomes enlightened by fighting the world. No one heals by blaming society. No one becomes free by hating the system. The real revolution isn't destroying the collective mind. It's transforming it from within, like a virus carrying love, like art spreading lucidity, like a song interrupting the noise with beauty. The collective mind is rewritten when you change how you live, not how you shout. And for that, you have to develop the art of taking nothing personally. Because in this game, everyone projects. No one sees others as they are, but as they need them to be. And you are not responsible for what others invent about you. You're only responsible for not turning it into your truth. In a world where everyone is competing to be right, having peace is the true victory. The collective mind has also created its idols, its plastic heroes, its rules about love, success, time, beauty. Everything is cataloged. Everything has a mold. If you're a woman, you must act a certain way. If you're a man, you must behave like this. If you're 30, you should be here by now. If you're single, it must be for this reason. If you don't fit in, something must be wrong with you. But there is nothing wrong with you. What's broken is the program that refuses to allow new versions. What's outdated is the code that doesn't tolerate what it can't understand. The good news is, you are not that code. You are the one who can rewrite it. And this is not about abandoning society and running off to the mountains, though that might sound tempting. It's about bringing awareness to everything you do, eating with awareness, loving with awareness, arguing with awareness, getting dressed with awareness, working with awareness, breathing with awareness. Because it's not what you do that changes the world, but where it comes from within you. There's a simple but powerful exercise. Before doing anything, ask yourself, does this come from fear or from love? And answer with brutal honesty, because fear has 1,000 masks, and love, none. This book won't turn into a sermon of spiritual manners. We're here to play, to provoke, to create together a new way of looking at reality. We're going to laugh at what once crushed us. We're going to give ourselves permission to be human without needing anyone's permission. Because true intelligence isn't knowing many things. It's knowing how to live with art. This is the beginning of the game, or better yet, of the awareness of the game. Here, the winners aren't the smartest or the strongest. The winner is the one who dares to see, to feel, to change their breath, their path, their story. The world doesn't need more perfection. It needs more truth. And truth begins the moment you allow yourself to stop performing and start living. In a corner of the world, where few are looking, something happened that never made it into the papers, but deserved an altar. A man decided to write a letter to fear, not a metaphor, a real letter, paper, ink, envelope, just like before. It said something like this: Dear Fear, thank you for protecting me. Thank you for keeping me from making a fool of myself in school, from speaking my truth at family dinners, from chasing the life I dreamed of. You've been efficient. You've done your job. But now I want to grow. And for that, I need you to move to the back seat. I don't want to eliminate you. Just stop obeying you. I promise to check in with you in real danger, not the imaginary kind. I invite you to walk with me, but not to decide for me. He signed it with his name, burned it in a ceramic cup, and went to sleep crying, but relieved. The next day, nothing magical happened. No enlightenment, no heavens parted. He just went to work, greeted the doorman with a more authentic smile, and didn't apologize for being himself. And that was enough. Because sometimes the true awakening goes unnoticed, but it's felt. It's not an explosion. It's a soft click, like the one a lock makes when the right key finally turns. And from there, everything changes. Not because the outside world changes, but because inside, you stop being a spectator and become the protagonist. And that shift is subtle, but irreversible. Look, dear soul brother or sister, what we're saying here can't be summed up in a tweet, nor in a viral post with pastel backgrounds. It's a process, a journey, an elegant disobedience. It's not about running off to live in the forest. It's about not continuing to run toward emptiness just because everyone else is. It's not about turning off your social media. It's about turning your soul back on. It's not about avoiding the collective mind. It's about dancing with it without becoming its choreography. Like someone hearing a song they no longer like, but this time, they don't sing along, they just smile and play their own music. We could list tips, magic formulas, practical steps to hack the programming, but there are already too many gurus shouting formulas from the rooftop of their egos. What's missing isn't another formula, it's another way of seeing. A gaze that says, I don't know what to do, but I know I don't want to keep sleeping. A gaze with permission to say, I'm scared, but I'm trying anyway. A gaze that can confess, I'm tired of pretending I know who I am. Because that's where alchemy begins. There, in the crack, the light enters, and life becomes honest, imperfect, irregular, messy, but yours. And in a world where everyone's in a rush to prove they are somebody, having the courage to not know who you are is freedom. At this point in the journey, the soul no longer wants answers. It wants presence. It no longer wants to be told what to think. It wants space to feel what it was never allowed to feel. Because healing doesn't come from a new truth. It comes from finally allowing yourself to see what's always been there, waiting for you to look without judgment. And then, the real magic happens. The world doesn't change. Your way of living in it does. And there comes a moment when you no longer want to be anybody. Not because you're sad, not because you've lost, but because, at last, you've discovered yourself without decorations. It's a strange feeling. At first, it feels like emptiness, but then it feels like peace. It's not enlightenment, not an epiphany, not a calendar milestone. It's something quieter, more intimate, like the soul, after wearing 1,000 costumes, finally wipes off the makeup and breathes effortlessly. Like for the first time it says, I have nothing to prove, and that is enough. That is life after the name. Not after the ego or the identity or the culture, after the name. Because your name was the first thing they gave you when you arrived. It was your first label, your first role, your first assignment in this game. And for years, you defended it, strengthened it, turned it into a flag, until one day, you no longer needed it. You no longer want to be John the successful, Maria the resilient, Peter the spiritual. You no longer want to win the game. You just want to sit and look at the stars without narrating a single thing, without needing to say who you are, just to be. That is the most sacred terrain there is, where no one applauds but everything recognizes you, where there are no achievements but there is presence, where there's no noise but you are deeply alive. And curiously, no one teaches us how to get there. They teach us to build a character, to write a resume, to define ourselves with phrases that fit in a bio. But no one tells us how to live without a name, without a pose, without a shield. Because the collective mind doesn't know what to do with someone who no longer wants to be special. It gets nervous. It tries to label you again. So, are you a minimalist? Are you Buddhist? Are you depressed? Did you go vegan? Are you having a crisis? And you just smile, because you know the one who still needs a label hasn't taken theirs off yet. But to get to that point, brother, It takes something harder than climbing mountains or fasting for 40 days. It takes surrender without defeat, letting go without resentment, stopping the search without feeling lost. Some believe that awakening is a roar, a scream of freedom, a radical decision. But more often than not, awakening is a whisper. It's just another day, in just another mirror, in just another life, when suddenly you say, I have nothing left to uphold. And you don't say it in defeat, you say it in relief, like someone dropping a backpack that no longer carries anything useful. And that's when you begin to see the things that were always right in front of you but you could never quite see: beauty without form, silence with a voice, joy without reason, love without argument, laughter that rises from the absurd, not from sarcasm. That kind of laughter is the passport to life beyond the name. In a corner of the world where few ever look, something happened that's worth remembering. Her name was Clara, but she no longer responded to it, not out of rebellion, but because something inside her had simply let it go. For years, she had been Clara the therapist, the strong woman, the guide. Until one day, during a session in which a woman said to her, I need you to tell me who I am. Clara said nothing. Not because she didn't know what to say, but because, for the first time, she realized that saying nothing was saying everything. When the woman left, Clara didn't cry. She didn't shake. She simply sat there, staring at the plant in front of her, a plant that had been there for 5 years, and she had never truly seen it. She lives without a name, she thought, and she is so complete. That afternoon, she didn't go home. She went walking, crossed the bridge, took off her shoes, walked barefoot through a park where children played, unaware they were teaching everyone around them. And in a moment, like meeting an old friend, life whispered, You are not what you think. You are not what you believe. You are not what others say. You are what remains when all of that disappears. And Clara laughed. Not with the hysterical laugh of someone who's lost everything, with the soft laugh of someone who no longer needs anything. From that moment on, Clara stopped giving sessions, not because she disrespected her path, but because she had completed it. She no longer needed to teach anyone how to wake up. She only needed to be awake, without speaking of it. Today, she lives in a cabin no one visits, grows her own food, writes letters she never sends, looks at the sky as if seeing it for the first time. And sometimes, when a stranger asks her name, she smiles and says, I don't have one, but I can be your friend. And there is no greater wisdom than that. Because life after the name is not a place. It's a state of awareness where there is no need to explain yourself, where love follows no script, where the soul is no longer obligated to teach anything, only to live. And there, the true art of existing begins. Eventually, you reach that moment on the path when you no longer need a destination. Not because you've given up, but because you understand that every attempt to arrive was just a subtle way of running from what you already are, from what's already here, from what has always been God, creation, the greatest gift, the chance to create, to be, to expand, to live. That simple, that deep, that uncomfortable for a culture that rewards you for having goals, for planning, for constantly improving, for optimizing every minute as if life were an app with measurable performance. But here, there is no performance. Here, there is surrender. Not the kind that smells like defeat, but the kind that frees the soul from the ego's calendar. The kind that lets you admire a flower without asking what it's good for. The kind that lets you see others without measuring them. The kind that finally allows you to exist without an agenda. That is life after the name, when you realize you are not a biography, but a breath. Who would you be if you couldn't tell your story? What would be left of you if you couldn't say your name, your job, your age, your achievements, your wounds? What would you do if the only way to exist was to be? To many, that idea sounds terrifying, because we were taught that without a narrative, we have no worth, that without a label, there is no belonging, that without a clear definition, there is no identity. But here's a truth you won't find in textbooks, or in motivational videos, or in personal growth posts. Identity isn't something you find, it's something you dissolve. And when that happens, what emerges is something so radically pure that it can't be put into words, it can't be sold, it can't be shared as an accomplishment, because it's invisible, because it's intimate, because it no longer needs outside validation. At that point, you no longer have a position to defend. You no longer want to be right. You no longer need to convince anyone of anything, because you understand that every soul has its own rhythm, and your only task, if there is one at all, is not to interfere with it. True wisdom is dancing with life like it's music, not science, not math, just music, a creation of notes moving with joy and rhythm and energy. That's why every time you try to control it, interpret it, dominate it, you strip it of its art. Because life is not something to be analyzed. It is something to be felt, to be breathed, to be danced. And that's what Gustavo came to understand. Gustavo was an average guy, engineer, father of two, divorced. He had a good relationship with sarcasm, a terrible one with patience, and none at all with silence. His entire life was planned down to the detail. Until one day, his daughter said something that broke him in half. "Dad, why do you always seem so busy when you're with me?" He didn't know how to answer, because there was no answer, and because deep down, he knew it was true. So he did what he had never done before. He canceled everything. Everything. His schedule, his meetings, his commitments, his routines. And he left. Not on a trip. He left himself, his persona, his name, his need to be efficient. For weeks, he wandered without direction, not to sacred places, just to plazas, markets, parks that smelled of mango and wet dog. And one day, while watching an old man play chess with himself, he understood something. This man doesn't want to win, he just wants to be. And that crushed him, because his entire life had been a strategy to win respect, win security, win love, win certainty. But no one had ever taught him how to simply be without the pressure to win anything. He returned home with a lower head but a steadier soul. He traded his job for one with a smaller paycheck, but more time. He reordered his priorities, and most radically, he stopped defining himself. He no longer said, "I'm this or that." Now he said, "I'm being." And for many, that was unacceptable. "But what do you mean you're being?" they asked. "I don't know. I'm in the process. I'm being without really knowing what that means yet. And for now, that's enough." They didn't understand him. Some admired him. Others avoided him. But Gustavo no longer cared. Because he hadn't arrived somewhere new. He had simply left the old. And that is the miracle of life after the name. You don't need to change your life to live differently. You only need to empty yourself of the idea of you that's been holding you back. As Anthony DeMello once said, "When the eye is unobstructed, the result is vision. When the mind is unobstructed, the result is wisdom. When the soul is unobstructed, the result is love. And when all of that happens at once, the result is a way of existing that no name could contain." The soul does not follow instructions. It doesn't seek formulas or flowcharts. What moves it isn't the map, it's the tremor. That quiet shiver you feel when something touches you from the inside for no apparent reason. As if a memory older than language were awakening in the middle of your routine. That's what Elena felt the first time she cried without being sad. She was folding laundry. The dishwasher was running. In the background, a podcast spoke about atomic habits for increasing productivity. Everything was normal, domestic, predictable. But in the middle of the clinking dishes and the smell of detergent, something inside her dissolved. She cried without a story, without a reason, without explanation. And it was the first time in years that she felt alive. It wasn't sadness. It was more like an inner birth, a crack in the identity she had been upholding with such effort. Because Elena, like many, was an expert at holding it all together, holding the image, the family, the polite tone of voice, the acceptable opinion, the life consistent with her curated feed. But that day, she understood she didn't want to hold things together anymore. She wanted to hold herself. And that meant letting go. Letting go of the need to be understood, to fit in, to explain herself, to appear useful. That moment didn't change her life. It shattered it so it could change on its own. From then on, she stopped talking about my story. She started talking about my moment. Because she discovered that a story is a retrospective invention, a tale we tell ourselves to justify why we are where we are. But the moment doesn't lie. It doesn't have a narrative. It only has presence. And presence is the soul's original language. It needs no applause, no context. It only needs you to be there. That's why those who have touched life beyond the name no longer speak from the mind. They speak from the pause, from the space between words, from that invisible slice of language where you don't inform, you transform. Like what happened to Omar. Omar was a librarian, quiet, methodical, nearly invisible. But he had a habit. When someone asked for a book, he didn't just hand it over. He'd ask, "Will you read this with your body or with your soul?" People would laugh, thinking it was some quirky joke. But he meant it. To him, reading was like eating. You could devour in anxiety or savor with true hunger. One day, a young woman returned a Hermann Hesse book and said, "I didn't understand a thing." Omar looked at her with gentle eyes and said, "Perfect. That means you didn't read it. Your name did." She frowned. Omar stood, picked out another book, thinner, simpler, and handed it to her. "Try this one. Read it when you forget who you're supposed to be." That day, the young woman started a journal, not to remember, but to forget, to empty out, to write without a signature, without expectation, without agenda. Because writing without a name is a way of praying without a religion. And that, in the end, is what allows us to heal, to stop acting as the protagonist in our own biography. Who are you when no one is watching? Not when you're alone, but when not even you are observing yourself. That is where the miracle happens, where life no longer has to resemble anything, where silence is not absence, but origin, where a bird singing on the platform becomes more sacred than 1,000 spiritual retreats. And then the unthinkable happens. You no longer need to be right or have a purpose or even have words. You only need one thing, to not be absent from yourself. That is life beyond the name. A life that is not performed, it is inhabited. A life that is not justified, it is breathed. A life where the soul doesn't shout to be heard, but whispers so you can learn how to listen. And that, right there, is the beginning of the true end. The end of the illusion that we are what we accumulate, what we say, what we defend. Somewhere deep in the soul where no one looks, life chuckles softly, not in mockery. It laughs with the kind of wise laughter only those who have seen it all and still choose to dance can understand. Because after dismantling so many beliefs, questioning borrowed thoughts, and shedding old labels, there comes a glorious moment when there is nothing left to do. Just laugh, just live, just be. Not out of indifference, but out of understanding. Not because you're avoiding anything, but because there's nothing left to prove, not even to yourself. True freedom does not make an entrance. It doesn't come with fireworks or grand speeches. Sometimes it arrives dressed as a yawn, as a giggle, as a walk with no destination. Sometimes it's an unassuming hug, an off-key song that doesn't care how it sounds, an afternoon nap while the world rushes by. And when it comes, it doesn't announce itself, it simply arrives. And you know something has changed because suddenly you can breathe without asking for permission. And you know what's funniest? You've been chasing it this whole time like a hound on a scent, while it's been waiting for you on the other side of the mirror. Not the mirror of vanity, the mirror of identity, the one that convinced you for years that you were your name, your role, your duty, your expectation, and suddenly it breaks, not with a crash, with a laugh. Yes, sister, brother, laughter is a form of enlightenment. That's why the wisest of the wise always laughed, because they understood everything, and then they let it go, like someone who contemplates the perfect mechanism of a clock and decides to be late on purpose, because they realize that precision is not the same as life, and that life is far too sacred to be taken so seriously. Facundo Cabral used to say, "If you're not willing to laugh at yourself, you're about to become a slave." Osho, with his divine irreverence, taught us that laughter and meditation can be the same if they're born from the soul. And we, having come this far, what will we do? Keep frowning, looking for formulas? Or will we play this game with the looseness of someone who's finally realized it's all an exquisitely designed cosmic joke? This isn't about irresponsibility. It's about maturity, the kind of maturity that stops carrying the world and dares to dance with it. Because those who live out of obligation aren't really living, they're just surviving. And those who can no longer allow themselves to play have already been domesticated, not by others, by their own fears. And seriously, who said spirituality had to be so serious? Who sold us the image of the enlightened one as someone who doesn't laugh, doesn't enjoy, who only gazes at the horizon with poster-face serenity? Since when did awakening mean the end of fun? Maybe, just maybe, it's the opposite. Maybe awakening means laughing when the ego most wants to cry, dancing when the mind most wants to run, loving when the world insists you should defend yourself. There is a kind of laughter that frees you more than 1,000 books ever could, one that rises from the gut, climbs through the chest, and explodes in your eyes. That laughter that cannot be faked, that doesn't need a reason, that simply happens, like a soul bursting through, like a reminder that you're alive. And when that laughter appears, no structure can hold. The solemnity cracks, the mental costumes fall away, and all that's left is what's real, what's sacred, what breathes without a script. And then you understand that the true game of the collective mind was never to avoid it or to fight it or to run from it, but to dance with it, with awareness, with art, with joy. Because yes, joy is also an act of rebellion. In a world addicted to complaints, drama, urgent opinions, and curated conflict, the one who dares to be joyful becomes a revolutionary, not one of banners, one of soul, a soul that no longer drowns in the rules of the game, but rides them like waves. And that doesn't mean everything becomes easy, or that we must deny our pain. It just means that once it's been felt, once it's been understood, once it's been loved, even pain can laugh. It becomes teacher, it becomes plot. Like those villains who, at the end of the film, we realize were necessary for the hero to grow. That's how the ego works. That's how sorrow works. That's how everything that once broke you eventually opened you. So when the game ends, or when it seems like it might, the best thing you can do is look back and smile. Not because everything was perfect, but because you were real, because you didn't give up, because you stayed true even when you didn't know who you were, because you laughed at the wrong time, because you danced with fear, because you spoke while your voice shook, because you cried with shame, because you loved like a beginner, and most of all, because you didn't close. And now, in this moment, there's only one glorious thing left to do. Bow to the character. Thank them for what they endured, for what they carried without understanding, for what they kept quiet about without knowing why. And then, let them go. Because you are not your character. You are not your story. You are not your past. You're not even your best version. You are the one who watches, who laughs, who wonders, who doesn't know how but is still here. You are the one who dares, and that needs no explanation. You didn't come here to fulfill anything. You didn't come to be approved. You didn't come to carry ancestral silence or rescue a family tree choked with should-haves. You didn't come to be the best version of anything. You came to breathe with an open chest, even if it trembles. To look at the sky and know you don't understand it, but it still moves you. You came to say yes to the most forgotten miracle of all, being alive. And once you've let go of inherited ideas, of fears that were never yours, of expiration-dated goals and names you never pronounced with love, what's left is you. Without script, without safety net, without a role. You, the one who sees, the one who feels, the one who plays. Then something unexplainable happens. There's no longer a you who would speak like before, nor a them who would answer in character. There's just silence. And in that silence, the party begins. Because now that you no longer need to be right, you can truly listen. Now that you don't have to impress, you can be honest. Now that you're no longer competing, you can celebrate everyone. And that, dear one, is freedom. Freedom isn't something you acquire. It's something that reveals itself, like a truth that's always been there, covered by borrowed phrases, imported goals, and unexamined rules, like a flower blooming in secret, like a song you've always had inside, and finally sing out loud. And of course they'll say you're crazy. Of course they'll judge your unfiltered laughter, your untraded joy, your presence that can't be packaged. But who cares? You no longer live to convince, you live to resonate, and that cannot be stopped by anyone. Once you've awakened, you can never fully go back to sleep. You might blink, you might get distracted, you might pretend nothing's happening. But deep inside, the light has made contact, and that contact is irreversible. You've stopped being a role in the play and become the conscious actor. You no longer act out of habit. Now you choose. You choose whether to speak, to stay silent, to walk away, to stay, to answer, or simply smile. And that choice, that's the real magic. Because no one can choose without awareness, and no one can be free without choosing. And if this entire book leaves you with anything, let it not be a list of tips. Let it not be a new spiritual identity. Let it not be another map you now defend as the ultimate truth. Let it be a crack, a beautiful, brilliant, delicate crack through which the light gets in. Let it be a click, a suspicion, a laugh, a pause, a wait a second. Because that's enough. One micro pause in which you don't obey the thought that just arrived. One tiny rebellion without noise. One yes born of the soul. One no that needs no explanation. That's awakening. Not an epic, not a hero's journey, not a permanent mystical state. It's a repeated choice, a playful coherence, a joy with no audience. And if you lose things along the way, good. Let them go. The real ones won't leave. If you make people uncomfortable, perfect. Growth is uncomfortable. If they call you strange, celebrate. Because being strange in a world of copies is a blessing. Now you know you can be sad without drama, happy without justification, present without explanation. You can say no without guilt, and yes without fear. You can leave a message unanswered, turn off your phone, dance alone, look at the sky without asking for anything, sit in silence with someone you love, and let that be enough. And yes, you will fail. You will make mistakes. You might fall back into old mental traps. But now, you know something that changes everything. You are not the trap. You are not the mistake. You are not someone else's echo. You are not the fear you inherited. You are the one who can witness it all without getting lost in any of it. And that, brother, that can't be taken away from you by anyone. From here on, the only thing left is to celebrate, not with a loud party, but with a silent toast of the soul. A bow to everything lived, a smile to what's coming, a laugh shared with existence itself. Because you did it. You didn't wake the world. You didn't start a new religion. You didn't enlighten the masses. You simply came back to yourself. And that, in this world, is a revolutionary act of love. The game ends when you stop trying to win and start enjoying every move. The collective mind is still there, offering you stories, cultures, cities, languages, duty, and art, its dream and its wakefulness, its rigid structures and its free music. It awaits you with its chaos and with its rules too. But now, you play differently. You are no longer the piece. You are the player. You no longer react. You respond. You no longer survive. You choose to live. And now, life itself turns to you and says, "Welcome home." And in this home of yours, we will meet again in the next audiobook. But until then, engrave this into your soul. Happiness is not a distant goal, nor a prize that awaits you. It is the invisible force that moves you, the breath that enters uninvited and keeps you alive, the silent moment that is happening right now. And that gives you permission to be you, without masks, without effort, without fear. Just you. And that is already everything. See you soon.